On the frozen lake, a man with an oxygen tube shivers. A 6-year-old presses a red glove into his hand. What debt is hidden in that warmth? Snow fell in slow spirals over Loring Park, frosting the bare trees and benches like a dream half erased. The lake was frozen solid, a dull mirror under gray skies. I remember how the air burned my nose that morning, how my breath came out like smoke. I was 6, bundled in my grandfather's old coat that didn't quite close. My mittens were too big, or rather, just one of them was. That's when I saw him. An old man sitting alone on the bench by the lake, shoulders trembling under a black overcoat. His gloved hands rested on his knees, and a thin plastic tube curled into his nostrils, snaking down to a small portable tank beside him. He looked like the cold itself had chosen him. "Grandpa?" I whispered, tugging his sleeve. "Why's that man shaking?" George Harper squinted through the flurries. "That's none of our business, Owen." "Keep your scarf up, but..." The man looked up. His eyes were gray, almost colorless, like the lake behind him. When he smiled, barely. It was the kind of smile that carried more apology than joy. Something in my chest twisted. I slipped one glove off and took a step toward him. The snow cracked under my boots. "Here," I said, holding out the red mitten. "It's warm." He stared at it for a second, as if he didn't quite understand. Then, with shaky fingers, he accepted it. His lips trembled, but not from the cold. "You shouldn't give away what you need, son." I shrugged. "You look colder." The wind cut between us. For a second, the sound of the city faded, and it was just the old man and me. His breath uneven, mine too quick. Then my grandfather called, and I ran back, snow crunching beneath my shoes. When I looked back, the man was still watching me, the red mitten glowing like a flare against all that gray. 2 days later, I saw him again outside the park cafe, waiting in line behind construction workers with steaming cups of coffee. He still had the oxygen tank, though his coat looked heavier. When he noticed me, he lifted the red mitten in a small wave. "You again?" he said when I approached. His voice rasped, thin but kind. "I was wondering if I'd see my rescuer." I grinned. "Did it help?" It did. He paused to breathe, slow and deliberate. "You've got a good heart, Owen. Not everyone sees when someone else is cold." He crouched slightly, enough for me to notice the pale scar tracing his cheek. "I used to come here every morning," he said. "It's quieter by the lake. Easier to think what about. About people I lost." He smiled faintly. "And promises I didn't keep." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. When my grandfather returned with our cocoa, the old man straightened. "You take care of that glove," he said softly. "It's part of a story now." "Your story?" I asked. "Maybe both of ours." That night, while Grandpa checked the heater and made tea, I found my other red mitten, drying on the radiator. I thought about the man's cracked lips, the way his breath came out like smoke through the cold air. Grandpa came into the room and sighed. "You talking to strangers again, Owen?" "He wasn't bad," I said. "He just looked lonely." "Lonely people sometimes have reasons," Grandpa muttered. Then, seeing my face fall, he added more gently, "You got a big heart. Just keep your hands warm next time." But even as I nodded, I couldn't stop wondering who that man was, and why his eyes looked like someone who'd already said goodbye too many times. 3 mornings later, a black SUV idled near the same bench. The man sat inside this time, wrapped in blankets. A nurse adjusted his oxygen line while he stared at the frozen lake. I almost didn't approach, but he spotted me and gestured. "Mr. Lang?" The nurse called him when she stepped aside. "Victor," he corrected softly, smiling at me. "Always Victor." That was the first time I learned his name, Victor Lang. And though I didn't know it then, that tiny exchange, the red mitten, the name, the breath frosting between us, was the moment our stories began to stitch together, thread by fragile thread. The next morning, Loring Park looked like a photograph someone had forgotten to color in. The snow had stopped, but the air was sharp and dry, and the lake shimmered under a crust of ice. Grandpa and I took our usual route, but he slowed when he spotted the same man waiting on the bench. Victor Lang wasn't alone this time. A man in a gray wool coat stood beside him, flipping through papers with the precision of someone used to being obeyed. When Victor saw me, his lips curved into that same tired smile. He gestured me closer with his gloved hand, the red one, the one I'd given him. "Morning, Owen," he rasped. "Got a minute?" Grandpa hesitated. "Sir, we don't want to bother—" "It's no bother," Victor interrupted, his voice soft but certain. "Your grandson did me a kindness. I'd like to return it the lawyer. At least, that's what he looked like." Glanced at Victor, uneasy. "Mr. Lang, you shouldn't—" Victor raised a hand. "Just a minute, Thomas." He patted the space beside him on the bench. I sat. The wood was cold through my jeans. "You ever heard of a company called AgriSync?" Victor asked. I shook my head. "Well," he said, a ghost of humor flickering in his eyes, "neither had most of my investors until they made a fortune off it." Grandpa's eyebrows lifted. "You're that Lang?" "The startup guy?" Victor chuckled weakly. "Used to be." "I left when I got sick. Lungs," he said, tapping the small oxygen tank. "Not much air left for board meetings." The lawyer looked away, his jaw tight. Victor turned back to me. "You remind me of someone," he said. "She used to bring me coffee at the university. Red hair, same eyes. Her name was Claire Harper." My head snapped up. "That's my mom's name." Victor froze. For a heartbeat, everything around us seemed to hush. The distant hum of traffic, the faint scrape of skates on ice. Even the wind paused. He swallowed, voice dropping low. "Your mother, she used to sketch by that lake. Said it helped her think. She was—" His breath hitched. "She was the best thing I ever lost." Grandpa's face hardened. "You knew my daughter?" Victor nodded. "Too well and not well enough. I hurt her once. I've spent 20 years trying to be someone she might have forgiven." The lawyer stepped forward, whispering something that sounded like, "Not now, sir." But Victor ignored him. "How's she doing?" Grandpa hesitated. "She passed." 6 years ago, Victor's breath caught. His hand gripped the bench, white-knuckled. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I didn't know." I looked between them, confused, sensing something heavy hanging in the space they shared. Victor cleared his throat and reached into his coat. He pulled out a small envelope and pressed it into Grandpa's hand. "There's a number in there. My office. Ask for Thomas. I want to see you both again. Soon." Then he looked at me and smiled, tired but kind. "Bring your other mitten next time. I've got a surprise that evening." Grandpa sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope. The kitchen light buzzed faintly. "He said he knew your mother," he muttered. "Did he love her?" I asked. Grandpa looked away. "Maybe once. But love's not always enough, kiddo." He opened the envelope. Inside was a business card embossed in silver. Lang Agricultural Systems, Minneapolis Tower, 15th floor. "Why would he want to see us again?" I asked. Grandpa sighed. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." 2 days later, we visited his office downtown. The building glittered with glass and steel, its reflection trembling in the snow-melt puddles below. Victor's assistant greeted us, her tone reverent, almost protective. "Mr. Lang's expecting you," she said. Inside, the office smelled faintly of pine and medication. Victor sat near the window, his oxygen tank humming quietly. He smiled when he saw me, holding up something, small and red. A pair of knitted mittens, mine, completed into a matching set. "You left one," he said, handing them over. "I had my housekeeper finish the other. Thought you might need both hands warm." I stared at the stitching, perfect rows of yarn that felt both new and familiar. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded, then turned to Grandpa. "I wanted to talk about something official. You're Owen's guardian?" "Yes," Grandpa said warily. Victor exhaled slowly. "I've been thinking about legacy. About what to do with what's left of mine. I'd like to establish a community trust, a fund for kids like Owen, those who fall through the cracks." The lawyer Thomas entered quietly. "Mr. Lang's serious. We've drafted the framework." Grandpa frowned. "Why us?" Victor's eyes flicked toward me, softening. Because kindness deserves a future. He paused, then added almost to himself. And because I owe one. When we left the tower, the city lights shimmered through the falling snow. I clutched the new red mittens tight. Grandpa said nothing on the way home, his expression unreadable. But when we reached our street, he murmured under his breath, "Claire, what did he promise you back then?" I looked up at him. "Who's Claire?" He forced a smile. "Your mom. And I think, Owen, we're about to learn something she never got to tell us." That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind scraped against the window, and the faint whistle from the streetlights made it sound like the city was breathing through its teeth. On the chair beside my bed, the red mittens rested neatly, still warm from my palms. I turned one over, tracing the new stitching where Victor's housekeeper had finished it. The yarn was slightly darker, like a second voice joining the first. Down the hall, Grandpa coughed once, then went quiet again. I thought about Victor Lang, his trembling hands, the soft hiss of his oxygen, the way he'd said legacy like it hurt to pronounce. The next morning, Grandpa was already sitting at the kitchen table with a folder open. Bills, hospital statements, the long column of numbers that made him frown. "You're up early," I said. He didn't look up. "Couldn't sleep. Got a call last night. From some clinic billing office. They're threatening to send your grandmother's old hospital debt to collections again." I poured milk into my cereal. "But she's gone." "That's the world, kid," he muttered. "They don't care who's alive or not. They just want payment." The phone rang again. Grandpa let it go to voicemail. After a long silence, he asked, "That Lang fellow, he said something about a fund, didn't he?" I nodded. "For kids like me." Grandpa stared at the mittens on the counter. Maybe he meant it for more than that. Later that week, Victor called us back to his office. His voice on the phone had sounded thinner, like each word had to fight its way through air that didn't want to cooperate. When we arrived, his office was dimmer than before. The blinds were half closed, and a nurse lingered near the doorway, checking a clipboard. Victor smiled faintly when he saw us. "Owen," he said, his voice rasping, "come closer. I've been waiting to show you something." On his desk sat a single page, neatly printed, with bold letters at the top. Lang Harper Trust, draft agreement. Grandpa froze. "Harper?" Victor looked up. "If your daughter's name hadn't been attached, I wouldn't have found the courage to do this." Thomas, the lawyer, adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Lang is creating a charitable trust. The proceeds from his remaining shares in AgriSync will go into a fund for community aid. He insists it bear your family name jointly." I blinked. "Like a foundation?" Victor chuckled softly. "Something like that. But simpler. More human." He turned to Grandpa. "You don't have to accept anything now. But when I'm gone, I want Owen to know kindness doesn't vanish just because someone does." Grandpa's jaw tightened. "You keep saying when." "Don't talk like that." Victor smiled without humor. "I've made peace with the when. I'm only trying to make sure the after means something." He pushed a small envelope across the desk. Inside is a letter. "For Owen, but not yet. It's marked for 18. Promise me you'll keep it safe until then." I stared at the envelope, my name written in shaky handwriting. The corners of the paper were smudged, as if he'd held it too long. "I promise," I said quietly. Outside, snowflakes began to fall again, slow, deliberate, like tiny parachutes landing on the frozen lake. We stopped at a small diner near Nicollet Avenue. Grandpa stirred his coffee, silent for a long time. "What are you thinking?" I asked. He exhaled. "That man, he's hiding something. Maybe guilt, maybe more. But whatever it is, he's trying to fix it before time runs out." I sipped my cocoa. "He said he knew Mom. Maybe he's trying to say sorry." Grandpa looked out the window, where snow blurred the headlights into streaks of gold. "If only apologies could pay hospital bills." He reached for the check and hesitated when the waitress said it had already been covered. "By who?" he asked. The waitress smiled. The gentleman with the oxygen tank. Said to tell the boy to keep his hands warm that night. A letter came in the mail. No return address, only my grandfather's name in typed print. Inside was a notice from a Minneapolis law office. Preliminary filing. Lang Harper Trust, pending review. Grandpa set it down, shaking his head. That man doesn't waste time. What does it mean? I asked. It means, he said, rubbing his temple, we're suddenly on someone's paperwork. He turned toward the window where frost gathered on the corners. His voice dropped to a whisper. Your mom never told me the full story with him. But if he's doing this for you, Owen, maybe it's time I found out what he's trying to make right. He looked back at the red mittens hanging by the radiator, their color glowing faintly in the dim light. Maybe, he said softly. Some debts aren't about money at all. The next morning we walked past Loring Park again. The bench where Victor had sat was empty. Only a trail of oxygen prints, 2 faint circles in the snow, remained beside it. I pressed my glove into one of the impressions, my palm fitting perfectly inside. Come on, kid, Grandpa murmured, his voice low. Let's get you to school. We'll figure out the rest later, but I wasn't sure we would. Because deep down, even at 6 years old, I could feel something changing. Something big, like the world was holding its breath for whatever came next. By the time January deepened, the lake had turned into a sheet of glass beneath the pale Minneapolis sky. The cold bit sharper now, the kind that made wood groan and lungs ache. Grandpa and I walked through Loring Park every morning still, though we hadn't seen Victor Lang in over a week. His bench stayed empty, the imprint of his last visit now buried under fresh snow. Then one Thursday evening, as I was stacking firewood behind the house, a black sedan pulled up by the curb. A man stepped out, tall, careful, wrapped in a dark overcoat. It was Thomas, the lawyer. His breath showed in quick puffs. Mr. Harper, he said, removing his gloves. Mr. Lang asked me to check on you and Owen. Grandpa frowned. Is he all right? Thomas hesitated. He's holding on, but his condition has worsened. He still insists on finalizing the trust papers, though, he paused. He wants you both to come tomorrow. It's important to him. Grandpa's eyes narrowed. We'll be there. The next morning, the hospital smelled of antiseptic and lemon polish. Machines hummed softly in the background. Victor lay propped up in bed, oxygen hissing beside him, the window behind showing a faint skyline through fogged glass. His skin looked almost translucent, but his eyes brightened when he saw us. Owen, he whispered, his voice a rasp. You came. I nodded and set the mittens on his blanket. I thought you'd need them more. He smiled weakly. Not. This time, kiddo. You keep them. Warm hands are for the living. Grandpa sat stiffly in the chair beside the bed. You shouldn't be worrying about paperwork now. Victor turned toward him. You think this is about money? He drew a shaky breath. No, it's about repair. Thomas stepped forward, holding a folder. Mr. Lang asked me to bring the draft. Victor motioned him closer. I want you to witness this, George. It's not charity. It's a promise. He looked at me again. Your mother used to sit right there by that lake with me. She'd draw in her sketchbook and tell me stories about the future. I was young, stupid, afraid of responsibility. I ran when things got complicated. Grandpa's hands clenched on his knees. You left her. I did, Victor whispered, and she never forgave me. But when I saw Owen that morning, it was like she sent him to remind me who I'd been. Silence filled the room except for the steady hiss of oxygen. I don't have much time left, Victor said, but I can still make something right. He nodded to Thomas, who opened the folder and spread the documents across the bedside table. The Lang Harper Trust, Thomas explained quietly. It'll fund community programs, heat assistance, food drives, school supplies. Owen's name will be attached as a symbolic founder. Victor smiled at me. You gave me warmth when you didn't have enough for yourself. That's the kind of future I want this to build. Grandpa swallowed hard. You don't owe us this. Victor's eyes softened. Don't you see? I owe her, and I owe him a better world. He reached for the pen. His hand trembled so badly that the nurse had to steady the clipboard. The line of his signature wavered, then stilled. Thomas gathered the pages carefully. "It's done," he said. Victor exhaled, long and quiet. Then he looked at me. "Owen, there's something I never told your mother. Maybe one day you'll read what's in that envelope." He closed his eyes, his breathing shallow. "Until then, keep those. Mittens bright. Red means life. Don't ever let it fade." We left the hospital in silence. Snow fell thick again. Soft but relentless, blanketing everything in white. That night, Grandpa sat by the window, staring at the dark street. "You heard him, didn't you?" he said quietly. "Yeah," I whispered. He nodded, eyes far away. "I think he's saying goodbye." 2 mornings later, the call came. Thomas's voice was steady but heavy. Mr. Lang passed peacefully in his sleep. Grandpa didn't say a word. He just stood by the kitchen counter, his thumb pressed against the edge of Victor's business card until it bent. When he finally spoke, it was a whisper. "Your mother loved that man once. Maybe he finally kept one promise to her." I looked at the mittens hanging on the radiator. They glowed faintly in the dawn light, red against the gray morning. A week later, we stood at the edge of Lakewood Cemetery. The snow was knee-deep, the kind that squeaked underfoot. The wind was sharp, slicing through our coats. Thomas was there, reading softly from a folded note. Victor Lang requested no grand ceremony, just quiet. He placed a small photo on the casket, a Polaroid of a woman with red hair laughing beside the lake. Grandpa's lips parted in surprise. "That's Claire," he murmured. Thomas nodded. He kept it all these years. And there, beside the coffin, I laid the red mittens, folded neatly together, on top of the wood. "They're his now," I said. "He made them warm again." Grandpa's hand found my shoulder. His grip was firm, steady. Maybe he did. The sky above turned pale gold for a moment, sunlight slipping through the clouds, and in that brief light, the red yarn seemed to catch fire. The next weeks blurred together. Snow, gray light. The quiet hum of life trying to continue. Minneapolis, in February, was all frost and waiting. Grandpa and I went about our routines, school errands, the long trudge past Loring Park. But the bench by the frozen lake stayed empty, its outline slowly sinking beneath the snow. One afternoon, an envelope arrived from Thomas's office. It was thick, sealed with a raised crest. Grandpa slid it open with a butter knife, his brows knitting as he read. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer at first. He just kept scanning the letter, jaw tightening. Then he handed it to me. It was from a law firm representing one of Victor's former investors. The words were sharp and formal. Petition to challenge the validity of the Lang-Harper Trust, citing compromised mental capacity and improper influence. I didn't understand all of it, but the tone was clear. Someone wanted to undo what Victor had built. Grandpa rubbed his forehead. "They're claiming he wasn't in his right mind when he signed the papers." "But he was," I said. "He knew exactly what he was doing." "I know, kid." But proving it's another story, he folded the letter and stared out the window. "They'll drag his name through the mud. And maybe ours too." The next day, Thomas called. His voice was tight, his words clipped with frustration. "Mr. Harper, I want you and Owen to come down to the office tomorrow. There are things you should see, evidence that may help us defend Victor's intent." When we arrived, he had already cleared the conference table. 3 items lay neatly before him: a printed email thread, a faded Polaroid photo, and a small sealed envelope marked in slanted handwriting, 418. Thomas tapped the envelope. "Victor left this for Owen. We can't open it yet, of course, but he also left a letter to the court stating that his mental clarity was verified by 2 witnesses that day, the notary and his attending physician. Still, the opposition is relentless." Grandpa's gaze landed on the Polaroid. It showed a younger Victor standing by the lake with a red-haired woman, her smile turned slightly toward him. Snowflakes blurred at the edges. Behind them, a child's stroller peeked into frame. That's Claire, Grandpa said softly. Thomas nodded. He kept it in his desk. For 20 years, he handed Grandpa the email printouts next. They were between Victor and a private clinic, a message chain confirming his cognitive assessment results. His writing was clear, deliberate, reasoned. This proves he was lucid, Thomas said, but they'll argue emotional vulnerability. The only thing that will stop them is motive. Motive? Grandpa repeated. Why he did it. Why a dying man would leave millions to a boy he'd just met. Grandpa looked down at me, his voice lowered. Because maybe he didn't just meet him. That night, Grandpa pulled out an old metal box from the closet. Inside were family photos. My mom at graduation, her sketches of the lake, a few letters tied with string. He placed them gently on the table, his fingers trembling slightly. She never told me who your father was, he said quietly. I asked once, and she said, some things are better left unnamed. But now, he trailed off. I looked at the photos. One in particular caught my eye. Mom holding a red mitten she'd just knitted, smiling proudly. Those look like mine, I whispered. They were hers first, Grandpa said. She made them when she was pregnant with you. Something clicked in my chest. The color, the pattern, it was the same. You think Victor... Grandpa stopped me with a slow shake of his head. We don't assume. We find out. The next morning, he met Thomas again. I stayed in the lobby, swinging my legs nervously on the chair. When they came out, Grandpa's face was pale. He held a manila envelope against his chest. They found something, he said quietly. Victor had a DNA kit filed with the court as supplemental evidence. He must have done it right before. He didn't finish. What does it say? He hesitated. It's sealed. The court will decide when to open it. Thomas's voice was careful. It's marked to be verified if paternity is questioned. Victor thought of everything. I stared at the floor. Paternity? Grandpa knelt down beside me. His voice cracked. It means he might be your father. Owen, that night, I couldn't eat. The mittens sat folded on the table beside my bowl of soup, bright against the dull wood. I reached out and brushed the yarn with my fingers. Why didn't she tell me? I asked quietly. Grandpa's sigh was long and heavy. Maybe she wanted to protect you. Or maybe she didn't think he'd ever come back. The radiator clanked to life, and for a long time we said nothing. The only sound was the slow hum of heat filling the house and the faint rattle of snow against the window. Finally, Grandpa said, whatever that envelope holds, it won't change who you are. You were loved. That's what matters. I nodded, but inside I wasn't sure I believed him. Because love, I realized, could leave behind more questions than answers. And as the wind howled outside, I thought about Victor's voice, the way he said legacy, like it was both a wound and a wish. The snow turned to sleet by the end of February, coating the sidewalks in a thin, treacherous glaze. Minneapolis looked half frozen, half dissolving, the kind of winter that made even streetlights seem tired. Grandpa and I trudged down Nicollet Avenue toward the courthouse, the manila envelope tucked under his arm. Every few steps, he glanced at me, then away, like he wanted to say something but couldn't yet. Inside, the Hennepin County Courthouse felt cold in a different way. Marble floors, echoing hallways, voices stripped of warmth. Thomas met us near security, his tie slightly loosened, his face more drawn than I'd ever seen. The hearing's been expedited, he said. Lang's investors filed to freeze the trust until the paternity claim is verified. The judge agreed to review Victor's letter and DNA file today. Grandpa grunted. Let's get it done. Thomas's gaze softened when he looked at me. Owen, I know this is confusing. Just remember, whatever the court decides, Victor's gift wasn't about money. He meant it as a promise. I nodded, though my stomach churned. The courtroom was smaller than I imagined. Rows of wooden benches, a flag in the corner, and the steady hum of the heating vent. The opposing counsel, a sharp man in a dark blue suit, stood with a stack of binders beside him. He didn't look at us when we entered. Judge Ellen Hartman presided, her gray hair pulled back in a bun, glasses perched halfway down her nose. Her voice was firm but not unkind. "We're here to determine the validity of the Lang-Harper Trust and the late Mr. Lang's mental capacity at the time of signing. Additionally, there's a motion regarding potential familial relation to the minor, Owen Harper." The words familial relation echoed like a bell in my chest. Thomas stepped forward. "Your Honor, Mr. Lang anticipated this challenge. We have his cognitive evaluations, dated 2 weeks prior to signing, and supporting statements from his attending physician. We also have a sealed DNA report that Victor requested be opened if this question arose." The judge nodded. "Let's proceed." The clerk handed over the envelope. Grandpa's fingers twitched at his side. For a moment, the room was utterly still, the air dense, with the sound of paper being slid open. Judge Hartman read silently, her eyes scanning each line. Then she exhaled. "According to the verified analysis conducted by Midwest Genetics Laboratory, dated February 3rd, Mr. Victor Lang is confirmed as the biological father of Owen Harper." The room went silent. Even the heating vent seemed to pause. My breath caught. Grandpa's hand reached for mine, steady but trembling. Thomas's voice cracked slightly when he spoke. "Your Honor, that corroborates Mr. Lang's intentions behind the trust." The opposing attorney recovered first. "Even so," he argued, "mental capacity remains in question. Emotionally compromised individuals are vulnerable to manipulation." Judge Hartman cut him off. "Save it. Mr. Lang's medical evaluations are clear. His capacity was certified. And his motives, it seems, were deeply personal and transparent." Her gaze softened when she looked at me. "The court upholds the Lang-Harper Trust in its entirety. Further, I will be issuing a protective clause to prevent frivolous appeals. This matter is closed outside." The snow had stopped. The city lights glimmered faintly through the gray haze, and for the first time in weeks, the wind didn't sting. Thomas shook Grandpa's hand. "It's over," he said. "The trust stands. And Owen?" He smiled faintly. "Victor wanted you to know the truth, but not to be defined by it. He told me once that family isn't just blood. It's what we choose to protect." Grandpa nodded slowly, his eyes glassy. He was right. That night, we sat by the radiator again, the same red mittens drying on the line above it. I turned them over in my hands, watching the yarn gleam faintly in the heat. "Was he really my dad?" I asked quietly. Grandpa's voice came out rough. "Yeah, Owen." He was. I looked up at him. "Do you hate him?" He hesitated. Then softly, "I did. For a long time. But maybe I just didn't understand the kind of fear that makes a man run." He came back in the only way he knew how. We sat in silence for a long time, the hum of the radiator filling the space between us. Finally, Grandpa said, "You know what your mom used to say about winter?" I shook my head. "She'd say cold's only dangerous if you stand still too long." "Keep moving, Owen. That's how you stay warm." I nodded, holding the mittens tighter. "Then I'll keep moving." Grandpa smiled faintly. "Good. Because I think Victor would have wanted that too." 2 weeks later, the local news ran a story. Lang-Harper Trust approved to launch first community warming drive. The photo showed the frozen lake at Loring Park, the bench dusted in snow, a small wooden sign beside it reading, "Be warm, be seen." Grandpa pointed at it while we watched from the couch. "That's our bench," I smiled. "Maybe it's everybody's now." He looked down at me, his voice soft. "That's exactly the point." The camera panned over rows of donated mittens and scarves, bright red ones at the front, each tagged with a small note. "For anyone who's cold. From Owen." And somewhere in that quiet, as the wind whispered against the window, I thought I could hear Victor's voice, steady, calm, certain, saying the same thing he'd told me once by the lake. "Warm hands are for the living." The thaw came slow that March, in hesitant streaks of gray light between the clouds. Snowbanks shrank into slush. Tree branches started dripping again, and the ice on Loring Park cracked in long, quiet seams. Grandpa said it was the sound of the world exhaling after holding its breath too long. Every afternoon, we passed the bench where Victor used to sit. Now, a small wooden sign stood beside it, staked into the frozen ground. Be warm, be seen. Lang Harper, Trust. People had started hanging gloves and scarves there, bright flecks of color against the white. Someone had even tied a red ribbon around the bench arm. I stopped and stared at it. He'd like this, I said. Grandpa nodded. Yeah. He'd call it proof of what? That something small can still change the weather. A week later, the first board meeting for the trust was held downtown. Thomas had insisted on inviting us, though Grandpa grumbled the whole way there. Meetings, he muttered. That's how good ideas die. The Lang Harper Trust office was smaller than I expected, just a converted suite in an old brick building overlooking the river. Inside, cardboard boxes lined the walls, still unpacked. A volunteer poured coffee into paper cups. Thomas stood near the whiteboard, sleeves rolled up, looking more human than lawyer. Mr. Harper, Owen, he said, smiling when we entered. You made it. He gestured to the modest crowd. Local business owners, 2 teachers, a pastor from the neighborhood. We're keeping it simple for now. First winter drive next week, then we'll expand. Grandpa sat back, arms folded. Victor would have hated. All this talking, Thomas grinned. He'd have walked in, handed everyone an assignment, and left. Everyone laughed softly. Even Grandpa cracked a smile. When the meeting ended, Thomas handed me a small envelope. Your father wrote this before he passed. It's not the one marked for 18. This one's for now. My heart kicked. I opened it carefully. Inside was a short note, handwritten in uneven ink. Owen. When people say legacy, they think it means money, or buildings, or names carved in stone. But it's smaller than that. It's the warmth you leave behind in someone else's hands. Keep building warmth, and you'll never run out of it yourself. Victor. My fingers trembled slightly. Grandpa placed a hand on my shoulder. He finally found the right words. That weekend, we returned to Loring Park carrying 2 boxes of donated mittens. The air was still cold, but the sunlight had that faint golden edge that hinted at spring. A local reporter was there, snapping photos. Are you Owen? Harper? She asked. I nodded. She smiled. You're kind of famous now. People from all over the city are dropping off gloves because of that story about the red mittens. How does it feel? I glanced toward the lake, the same place where Victor had once sat shivering in his coat. It feels like he's still here. She lowered her camera, her expression soft. That's a good answer. Grandpa carried another box over. Come on, kid. We've got work to do. We hung pairs of mittens along the railings, red, blue, yellow, handmade, and mismatched. Kids from the neighborhood ran around laughing, their breath clouds in the air. One boy tried on a pair and held up his hands proudly. Warm? I asked. He grinned, like the sun. That night, after the event, Grandpa sat by the fireplace, with his old photo album open. He turned a page and paused at a picture I'd never seen before. Mom and Victor, younger, standing in front of a cabin near the lake. They were kids, he murmured. Thought love was. Forever. Maybe it is, I said quietly. Just not always in the way they thought. He nodded. You're starting to sound like him. I smiled. Then maybe he did teach me something. A few days later, Thomas called again. We've had an inquiry, he said. An anonymous donor just contributed enough to fund the next 5 years. No name, no message. Just a single item, enclosed. What item? Grandpa asked. Thomas hesitated. A Polaroid photo of you and Owen standing at the bench last week. Someone must have been there watching. Grandpa frowned. That's strange? But I smiled. Not really. Some people don't need to be seen to be present. The following morning, we walked back to the park. The sun broke through for the first time in weeks, reflecting off the melting snow in rippling patches. Near the signpost, someone had placed a single pair of bright red mittens, just like mine, looped together with twine. I picked them up and turned them over. The stitching was identical to the ones Victor had finished. Inside one cuff, a small tag was sewn with neat thread. It read simply, "Keep the world warm." Grandpa's voice caught when he saw it. He must have arranged this before. I nodded, my throat tight. It's like he left a trail for us. The lake cracked again in the distance, the sound echoing through the park. I slipped on the new mittens and looked out at the thawing ice, where sunlight shimmered like breath returning to the earth. For the first time since winter began, I didn't feel cold at all. By April, Minneapolis was breathing again. The snow along the sidewalks had shrunk into gray veins, and the park grass showed its first hints of green. The "Be Warm, Be Seen" sign stood firm beside the lake, now surrounded by dozens of new mittens flapping in the breeze. Tiny flags of care. Grandpa and I walked the loop every morning. He always stopped by the bench, brushing off stray leaves as if tending to a grave. Then one morning, a man in a dark pea coat stood there waiting for us. "Mr. Harper?" he asked, extending a hand. "Detective James Weller. Hennepin, PD. Mind if we talk a moment?" Grandpa stiffened. "We haven't done anything." The detective smiled faintly. "I'm not here about you, sir. It's about Victor Lang. There's been a complaint." Thomas arrived minutes later, face tense. "A complaint? From whom?" The detective opened his notebook. "Lang's former business partner, Nathan Kerr, claims irregularities in the transfer of certain AgriSync shares to the Lang Harper Trust. He's alleging fraud, says Lang's signature was forged." My chest tightened, but I saw him sign it. In the hospital, Weller nodded. "I believe you, son. But the man's bringing lawyers and money. They're demanding a forensic audit." Grandpa's hands clenched. "They're trying to tear apart what he left behind." Thomas's expression hardened. "They won't succeed. But we'll need evidence. The originals, Victor's logs, his secure email backups. Some of those files might still be on his old workstation." He looked at me. "Do you remember anything Victor said about his office or where he kept private things?" I thought hard. "He said he liked quiet places, that he used to think better by the lake." Thomas frowned. "He had a cabin there years ago, didn't he?" Before he sold it, Grandpa's eyes widened slightly. "The one near Medicine Lake. My daughter used to go there." We drove out the next morning. The road curved along thawing fields and skeletal birch trees, the air carrying that damp, earthy scent of retreating winter. The cabin sat at the edge of the woods, a modest structure of weathered pine boards, its porch sagging under old snow. Inside, dust coated everything. The air was still, except for the rhythmic drip of meltwater leaking through the eaves. Thomas set down his briefcase. "We're looking for any documents that mention the trust or AgriSync." Grandpa opened drawers, rifling through faded receipts and yellowed letters. I wandered toward the back room, drawn by a faint metallic glint under the desk. It was a tin box, half buried beneath old magazines. I lifted it out carefully and blew the dust off. The initials, VEL, were scratched on top. Inside were old Polaroids, Victor and my mother, laughing in sunlight. Receipts for donations, and beneath them, a thumb drive taped inside a folded note. The handwriting was shaky, but unmistakable. "For Owen, when the truth is heavier than silence." This holds everything they'll try to erase. Thomas took the drive gently, his eyes widening as he scrolled through the files on his laptop. "These are internal emails, dated years ago. Lang warning Kerr about embezzlement from company funds. He archived them under a hidden directory. He knew this fight was coming." Grandpa exhaled. "So he wasn't running from guilt. He was protecting her name. And his." I glanced at the box again. At the bottom lay a folded photograph. Victor sitting with a baby on his lap, my mother's hand resting on his shoulder. The baby had my eyes. I felt something hollow and warm at the same time. "He wanted you to find this," Grandpa murmured. A week later, Thomas submitted the new evidence. The court convened a hearing to review the investor's claim. The judge dismissed it within minutes. Kerr's lawyers withdrew quietly after seeing the timestamps and chain of custody signatures. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. "Is it true the trust was being sabotaged?" one shouted. Thomas kept his tone measured. The Lang Harper Trust was built on truth, not profit. That's all anyone needs to know. When we got home, Grandpa placed the tin box on our mantel. "He left the cold behind," he said softly, and gave us a fire to tend. That evening, I went to Loring Park alone. The air had softened, carrying hints of rain. I sat on Victor's bench, staring at the still frozen center of the lake. A woman in a thick scarf passed by, stopped, and smiled at the mittens hanging from the rail. "Beautiful thing you've got going here," she said. I smiled. It wasn't mine to start with. "Well," she said, adjusting her scarf, "maybe it was meant for you to finish." When she left, I looked down at the pair of mittens I wore, the red ones Victor had made. The yarn had faded slightly, but the warmth remained. The wind picked up, fluttering the gloves on the rail like small flags of defiance. I whispered to the air, "To the man I never got to say goodbye to, I found it, Victor." Everything you left behind, for the first time, the silence around the lake felt like peace, not absence. The first heavy rain of spring fell over Minneapolis the night before the memorial. The city smelled of wet earth and thawed asphalt, the lake swollen and restless beneath low clouds. Grandpa and I arrived early to set up the folding chairs along the edge of Loring Park. The "Be Warm, Be Seen" sign had been polished, its lettering repainted. Beneath it, volunteers from the trust were arranging boxes of gloves and scarves, bright as confetti, against the gray. The memorial wasn't fancy, just how Victor would have wanted it. No podiums or speeches, just people sharing stories near the bench where it all began. Thomas stood near the front, holding an umbrella over the folders he carried. He looked older somehow, but lighter too. "The first winter drive reached 7 states, he told Grandpa. "Local schools are organizing their own versions." "It's spreading faster than we imagined," Grandpa smiled faintly. "Guess kindness is the only thing you can't patent." They shared a quiet laugh before Thomas turned to me. "Owen, there's something I need to give you." The court released the sealed envelope early, with your guardian's consent. He handed me the familiar craft paper, its corners slightly curled. "For 18, it said, in Victor's slanted handwriting. Grandpa put a hand on my shoulder. "He meant for you to read it when you were ready, not when you hit a number." "You're ready." The rain slowed to a whisper on the lake. I opened the envelope, carefully. Inside was a single letter and a small Polaroid. The photo showed my mother holding me as a baby on that same bench, Victor beside her, his arm around both of us. The bench looked almost identical to how it did now, just younger, cleaner, still wrapped in the past. The letter read, "Owen, if you're reading this, the world has already turned a few more seasons without me. I hope you've learned by now that warmth is never wasted, not even the kind given to strangers. Greater than I built companies, because I thought achievement would prove my worth. But one cold morning, a boy handed me a red mitten, and suddenly I understood that worth is something you give, not something you keep. I wasn't there for your mother when she needed me. I can't fix that. But I can leave something that grows the way she used to dream. I hope you'll take this trust further. Make it yours. Build warmth wherever the world forgets it's needed. You're the best part of me that ever existed. Greater than, dash, dad. The ink had run a little from tears or water. I couldn't tell which. My throat tightened until I couldn't breathe right. Grandpa reached for the photo, tracing my mother's face with his thumb. "She'd have forgiven him," he whispered. "Maybe she already did," I said. By mid-afternoon, people began arriving. Teachers, kids, neighbors, even a few of Victor's old employees. One man, in a wool cap, probably my age now, told me he'd once been fired by Victor for falsifying a report. He gave me a second chance years later, he said, smiling. Said failure's only final if you stop trying to do better. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't read from the paper Thomas offered. I just stepped forward and looked out over the lake. My dad once said red means life, I began. He was talking about a pair of mittens, but I think he meant courage, to keep going, to keep caring, even when the world feels frozen. I looked down at the mittens in my hands, the original pair, now slightly frayed. He built this. Trust because someone gave him a reason to believe in warmth again. I think we all need that sometimes. The crowd stood silent, except for the rain tapping softly on the umbrellas. So every winter, I said, we'll keep hanging these gloves around the city. Not as charity, but as proof. Proof that kindness outlives us. After the crowd left, Grandpa and I stayed behind. The lake had gone still, reflecting the cloudy sky like dull glass. You did good up there, he said, voice rough. I smiled. You think he'd be proud? I think he already is. He handed me the Polaroid again. Keep this close. It's the beginning of everything. I slipped it into my coat pocket beside the red mittens. That night, back home, I found myself staring out the window at the streetlight haloed by drizzle. The radiator hissed, filling the room with its steady hum. I thought of Victor, of my mother, of the long winter that had finally broken. Then, almost without thinking, I took out the mittens and hung them on the front porch rail, just above the steps. A couple walked by, the woman shivering under her coat. She noticed the mittens, hesitated, then smiled and slipped them on. For a moment, the world seemed warmer. Not by degrees, but by something invisible, steady, alive. And as their footsteps faded down the street, I realized Victor had been right all along. Warm hands are for the living. The first true spring morning arrived with sunlight sharp enough to make the puddles on the street shimmer like broken glass. Minneapolis smelled of thaw and mud and new beginnings. Grandpa brewed coffee, humming an old tune I hadn't heard since Mom was alive. That day marked 1 year since the morning I'd given Victor Lang a mitten. The city council had organized a ceremony near the lake. Nothing grand, just the way he would have wanted. Kids from the nearby school had painted wooden hearts and strung them from the "Be Warm, Be Seen" bench. Every gust of wind made them clack together like tiny applause. As we walked down the path, Thomas joined us, carrying a small box wrapped in brown paper. You've outgrown the red mittens, he said, smiling. So the foundation had these made for you. Inside lay a new pair. Deep crimson wool stitched with gold thread along the cuffs. On one wrist, embroidered in small letters, was OH. On the other, VL. I slipped them on, and for a second, I felt that same quiet spark from a year ago, when an old man's trembling hand had closed around a child's mitten in the cold. Thomas nodded toward the small crowd gathering by the bench. They're naming it officially today. The Lang Harper bench, a permanent plaque's being installed. Grandpa smiled. About time the city remembered the right kind of story. The mayor spoke briefly, thanking the trust for its work, but I barely heard her words. My eyes stayed on the lake, where the last fragments of ice were breaking apart, drifting lazily toward the shore. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the bench and rested my hands on the plaque. The metal was cool beneath my fingers, engraved with simple words, in memory of Victor Lang, 1968 to 2024. He believed warmth is a form of truth. Pass it on. I took a breath and turned toward the crowd. A year ago, I gave a mitten to a man I didn't know. I didn't realize it would give me a father I'd never met. A few people smiled softly. Others wiped at their eyes. He taught me that kindness isn't about big gestures, I continued. It's about what you do when no one's watching. It's the warmth you carry forward. I looked down at the lake again, sunlight flickering over the ripples. So if you ever find yourself here and it's cold, take a pair of gloves. They're not charity. They're a reminder. Someone before you was cared for, and someone after you will be too. After the ceremony, kids ran along the water's edge, laughter bright against the wind. Grandpa lingered behind, watching them. "You made this place live again," he said quietly. "Your mother, Ish, would have been proud," I smiled. "You kept me going when I didn't know how." He chuckled. "Old men are stubborn like that." We walked home slowly, cutting through the rows of maples that lined the street. Every branch seemed to glisten with melting frost, tiny drops catching the light like glass beads. That evening, Thomas stopped by the house one last time. He handed me a thick envelope. "These are the final documents for the trust. Your name's officially listed as successor chair. No pressure, but when you're older, it'll be yours to guide." "Will you still help?" I asked. He smiled. "As long as I've got breath in me." After he left, Grandpa sat across from me at the kitchen table, watching as I flipped through the paperwork. "Strange thing about promises," he said. "They can outlive the people who made them." I nodded. "I think that's what makes them real." He looked toward the window where dusk was falling soft and pink. "Tomorrow we'll start collecting gloves for next winter." Grinned. "Already ahead of you." The next morning, I woke early. The sky had that quiet blue before sunrise, the kind that makes everything feel possible. I put on my new red mittens and stepped out into the cool air. The streets were empty, except for the soft hum of the city waking up. When I reached the bench, dew glistened on the plaque. The lake was still, a thin mist rising from its surface. I sat there a long time, listening to the faint lap of water against the shore. Then I took one mitten off and laid it gently beside Victor's name. "Morning, Dad," I whispered. "You were right. Warm hands are for the living. And I'm still here." The mist shifted, catching the sun just as it broke over the trees. Light spilled across the lake, turning everything gold. For a heartbeat, I swore I saw a reflection, his outline beside mine, smiling in silence. I didn't move. I just let the warmth spread through my fingers, the air, the morning itself. Because some promises, I realized, don't fade. With time, they keep the world warm.